Welcome, Genesis. Thank you for taking the time to be a guest on my podcast. How are you today?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, Connie.
Yeah, I'm so honored to have you. So, please tell my audience your pronouns and then where in the world you're located and maybe something about you that may surprise them. Like that is an everyday thing.
So my pronouns are she and her. I'm located in the US, the Texas area. And one thing that may surprise the audience if they're not familiar with who I am Caribbean descent. So my mother is West Indian and my father was from Curacao. And I said
Oh.
was because it's been 2 years since he passed.
Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Um yeah, I didn't know that either. So that's awesome. I've only been in the Caribbean once, many years ago, but yeah, that's awesome. So, let's dive in. So, I have many questions. You're a visionary life coach, motivational speaker, author, and you have an internationally top-rated podcast with over 729 episodes, or like I saw number 729 when I looked last. And then also you call yourself a firecracker and mindset hacker, which I really find fascinating. Like I like the word firecracker, so I hope you let that firecracker out today a little bit. So let's start with this question. Imagine I have magic powers and you could relive one day of your life. Which day would you pick?
Ooh, okay. Hands down. I would relive the birth of my daughter and I would definitely tap on the universe, God, and whatnot, and have my dad be there so he could actually meet my daughter because that's one of the amazing people that I miss dearly. But I'm so thankful and grateful that my mom is still alive. But my dad and I were super, super close. Like people would say we were like two peas in a pod.
Okay, yeah, well, that's a beautiful day to relive. And since I have magic powers, of course, I would make everything happen. So, this is actually a good segue. So, you have now your own little daughter, but how was little Genesis when she grew up? Like, were you already a trailblazer and a firecracker back then, or did you become this in your life?
So I would say there were some remnants back then of me being a firecracker based on some of the stories my mom told me, like childhood stories whenever I was in elementary school. And I'm sure in where you're from, they may say primary school, where I remember they told my parents, hey, if she fights on the bus, you're going to have to drive her to school because I think there was a girl that was like picking on me and picking on me and picking on me. And then my mom said I turned around and I slapped the girl on the school bus. And I was like, I guess, I warned her. And she just kept doing it. And I just turned around and was like, and
Yeah.
it was history she wrote, or like the old times TV show, Murder She Wrote, metaphorically speaking.
But isn't it interesting? So this other girl was teasing you, teasing you, teasing you, and then you got this thing home, or your mom got this thing, you know? It's like, so a little bit, you were back then already standing up for yourself, like for what you're now doing or helping us do, no? So like when I listened to your podcast and when I listened a little bit what the experiences were in life, you were actually really starting as a young Genesis already.
Yeah, and it's funny, Connie, because Genesis means the beginning. So it was
Hmm.
like, had I known what I know now, but then, hindsight 2020, sometimes we have different seeds that are planted inside of us, but it may take a while for that seed to sprout or the harvest to come. But as long as we're planting those seeds, we will reap, but we may not reap when we want it to
Yeah.
happen. We'll reap it when we need it to happen.
Yeah, so wise words. Wow. Yes, it's true. We're like a little acorn, no? Like everything is already here. We just it comes out when the weather, and I say the weather with brackets, when the weather is right. No, then it's coming and growing out. So then I read that you studied at the University of Houston. So what did you study? Did you study I can't say it, sociology or psychology or anything like that? Or what were you studying?
So when I started there, my major was psychology. I was a psychology major for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got a job with a big oil and gas company. So I left from a small mom and pop company to a big one. And when I was working there, I was still a psych major. And my first engineering manager said, "What do you plan on doing with a psychology degree working at XYZ company?" I'm not going to disclose the name. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Oh, I don't know." But my goal was to use psychology as a stepping stone because I always wanted to go to medical school, and
Oh.
this would be perfect. So I ended up changing my degree. I have 2 older brothers, and they both told me that being a psychology was a pipe dream unless I got an MBA or a PhD. So I switched to supply chain and logistics and technology
Mm-hmm.
with double minors in purchasing and organizational leadership and supervision, which is way different than psychology,
Just
right?
wanted to say. And psychology was my wild guess because of what you're doing now. It's like I had no idea. But this is actually really interesting. I always love when people for a while do something so completely different to and now you're kind of came back to psychology, even though you may not have a psychology major, but you're it's still like the core of what you were interested in did kind of come back. So how did that happen?
I think I really just fell into it, and to be honest, like, I remember when I was a psych major, like, I had this one professor, like, she was, like, mean, mean, mean. I would say she was, like, mean Mary or negative Nancy, and she was like, "I don't think psychology is for you." And, teachers are supposed to be encouraging and
Hmm.
whatnot, but from a professor's standpoint, to say that to a student, it was kind of discouraging, but I didn't let that phase me. So I was like, "You know what? I could do anything that I put my mind to." But then me just kinda knowing the circumstances and working for this particular company, when they offered to foot the rest of my tuition bill, I was like,
Hmm.
"Check, sold." And it was like the firecracker pop. I was like,
Hmm.
because I was like, college is very expensive.
Hmm.
And so just coming back, like your question was, how did I come back to psychology? Was accidentally. So after I had got laid off from this particular Fortune 500 company, 1 week after my father passed, people were reaching out to me and they're like, "Hey, I see the work that you're doing around your book. I see the work that you're doing on different podcasts. Are you coaching?" And at the time I was like, "No." And one lady, she's like, "Would you mind coaching me? I'm in higher education and I'm aspiring to do something that has ties with DEI and B,
Hmm.
diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging." And that's what I was like, "Oh my gosh, this
Hmm.
is visionary life coaching because I'm already kind of giving people advice. So now I'm going from a free to fee method."
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So I wanted to touch on that later, but you're kind of brought it up now. So you also wrote a book, and so that probably, from what I know of it, I don't know a lot, but it has to do with your experience in the corporate world and also with the diversity and equity. And you probably had some not so nice experiences that um, reignited your trailblazer and rebellious genes that you have inside of you, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't my intention to really write a book. The name of my book, for those listening in, is Chocolate Drop in Corporate America: From the Pit to the Palace. And I know the name can be a bit, ooh, why would she say chocolate drop in corporate America? But when you look at the cover of the book, you see more than just a name. So I'm going to just hold it up there so you can
Yeah.
kind of see, Connie. And I want you, from a whole standpoint, but also from an individual standpoint, let me know what comes to your mind when you see the cover of the book.
Well, I see more men than women, and I see only one darker colored or darker skinned person than, and the rest is all white people. And yeah, what else? um, You're putting, oh, there is another different colored person there. Yeah, so I was in corporate too, not in North America. I was in Switzerland, and it just seems like this generic corporate type people, and we may not fit in that well. That's also what comes to my mind.
Yeah, so I'm gonna unpack it here, and I'm glad you pointed out. So there's actually two colored people. There's a lady here on the front, and there's a guy.
Yeah,
There
that's
is a person that is Oriental or Asian background. There's some non-melanated folks, and if you look at the uniforms, there's different people from different groups. And when I
mhm,
say groups, I mean different industries. And then the most important thing I like to highlight is here there's a world in the background,
mhm,
letting people know that even though it says in corporate America, America
mhm.
could be here, but
Yeah.
then the world, we impact worldwide. And when all of us come together, we're making long lasting change and we're driving impacts that are leaving imprints, whether you're in your home base or worldwide, because we're linking together. So whenever I say chocolate drop in corporate America, I say that because I am chocolate. And sometimes people are like, oh, you're African American or you're black or what are you?
Mhm,
And they have their blinders on and they just see the color, but they don't see, oh, she's first generation American. Her parents are foreigner. She's not the typical African American individual or whatever the case may be, but they see what the media quote unquote portrays, or they
mhm,
see what they hear and they try to adopt that to you, not realizing that you're not that token person and you're not going to have the same ideology or etc as someone else that may look like you. Each one of us has our own makeup and we come with our own experiences and our own background. So I said, I'm going to use a play on word, chocolate drop in corporate
mhm,
America. I really want to say Hershey Kiss, but I didn't want to be sued by the Hershey company. And then the subtitle is From the Pit to the Palace,
mhm,
meaning that each one of us has our own pit experience, Connie.
mhm. Yes.
Whenever we go through trials, tribulations, slips, trips, and falls, that experience is going to be different. But whenever we start to plateau and climb the ladder, whether it's a corporate ladder or we're scaling up our business if we're an entrepreneur or whatnot, that success is our palace. But success for Connie is going to be different than success for Genesis. But that does not mean we're both not successful. We just have different views when it comes to being successful. And you can't always take what social media says or what the world says and call it success, because just because that person has arrived does not mean you haven't arrived. And why are we trying to go tit for tat?
Yeah. Yeah, so true. And it's like me being not from the US and not from Canada, but from Europe, I have totally different view than a lot of people around here. So I totally get what you're saying. So I see different things or different, I have put different meanings to certain things. And sometimes I'm also surprised how people just assume certain stuff about me, and this doesn't always have to be just the skin color. It could just be um, like I don't like you do hear a little bit of an accent, so then sometimes people make judgments or opinions around that, and you're so right. If we just all come together and everybody just brings to the table what they're best at and we're working together, it's so much better than just like putting these labels on or judging. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is actually one of the core things that I wanted to ask you about and talk with you about, because so here on my podcast we talk a lot about mental clutter, and with mental clutter I mean like limiting beliefs, negative self-talk, and all these things that hold us back. And I heard you talk on another podcast about what you're doing around boundaries and the word of no. And so I wanted to talk with you about the word no, and not just when you hear the word no, but also when you have to say to somebody else the word no. So you pick which one you want to start talking about first.
Okay, so I'll start with hearing the word no, because many times whenever we hear the word no, it has a negative connotation and a negative rap around it, because we hear no when we're a kid. No, don't do that. Stop. Don't touch it. No, no, no. But then But then whenever you hear that no, it's the tone of voice that it's used in. There is a cause and effect around no. There are, body expressions around no, because when you say no, you have that look in your eye. You may be pointing that finger if you're talking to your child, or you may just be typing an email and you may type no, but then the tone around the rest of the email, how it's drafted and how the person receives it. There's so many different ways how no can be perceived. But whenever I started to hear no, I was like, I have to shake this because I keep being hit with negativity. And no could be negative, but it could also be positive. It could be something that, stops me in my tracks, but causes me to reflect versus being proactive or reactive. So there's two ways I like to look at that. So whenever I heard no, I was like, okay, new opportunity or new opening, or, there's something just that's keeping me where I am for a particular reason so I could learn the reason behind the season I'm in. And I've been faced with a lot of no's, applying for jobs after a layoff. No, 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 no. We're sorry, we've chosen another candidate. We're
Mhm.
sorry, you're overqualified, or whatever the jargon would be. And you know what? That kind of weighs on you, especially if you've been in the industry for a long time. I was in oil and gas for 12 years, but corporate for a total of 15. So that kind of discouraged me because I was like, what's wrong with me? I know I'm qualified. I know I have the experience. I know I have the education. Then I started to second guess who I was. So whenever
Mhm.
I flipped the script on no, I was like, I'm going to see it as new opening, next opportunity, not often, or whatever the case may be, in order for me to go from a negative mindset, which I like to say negative Nancy, into a positive mindset, which is positive Patty, to help me get outside of imposter syndrome and get outside of thinking. So that's
Mhm.
whenever I started to switch it up with no, so I could be better mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and not feel as if I'm not valid or feel invaluable or whatever. So
Can I
then,
quickly interrupt and ask
yes, yes,
a question? So, because so many people are holding themselves back, and I catch myself sometimes too, because we're so terrified of the no. And that's what I like so much about what you're saying. It could be next opportunity. It could mean that we may have to slow down. Was there ever a time you heard no, and in a moment it was devastating to you, and later you realized, oh my God, this was a blessing that it was a no, because we have these sides sometimes too.
yes, job offers that I got and that I didn't get whenever I heard no for the certain salary I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad that it was a no because with more money comes more problems," is
Mm-hmm.
what they say.
Mm-hmm.
With more money comes more time commitment and etcetera. And at the time, I was trying to conceive and all of that other stuff. And then whenever I heard no, another thing that was helpful was around the time that my father passed, I got a lot of no's, but what I needed was that no. I didn't want it at the time, but I needed it in order for me to reconvene and regroup who I was. Because had I went into another thing versus properly mourning the loss of my dad, I would have been a train wreck. So I'm glad that I've had the time to process and etc. And it helped me find out more about Genesis and what my capabilities are. And it helped me go from the backseat of my life to the forefront of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I even tapped into coaching because not only did I start coaching, but I hired a coach because every great coach has a coach. I don't know it all.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still work that needs to be done in and through me in order for me to be whole and complete for somebody else. So I said, I
Mm-hmm.
have to walk it like I talk it. And when I heard no from my coach, sometimes I was so upset. And he said, Genesis, I know you probably want to curse or cuss me out. And I said, you know what? I do, but I am not going to go back to BC, which is before Christ. And I was like, the truth hurts sometimes, but it helps me realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So those no's were a blessing and they were a miracle to me because had I launched before I was ready to go, I would
Mhm.
not be the woman that I am currently speaking to you, and I may not have the same abilities and power behind the messages that I deliver now.
Yeah, and I could imagine this also made you stronger to the other part of the no, to keep the boundaries and to actually be courageous enough to say no when no is uncomfortable. No, that's also why so many people are not just afraid to hear no, they're also so terrified to say no to somebody.
Mhm.
Speak a little bit more about the saying no and to keeping the boundaries.
So whenever I say no, I have to realize that I'm saying no to protect my mental sanctuary, to protect my physical sanctuary, meaning I don't want to burn myself out by taking on too
Mhm.
much that I know I cannot physically bear. Spiritually, whether I am managing my relationship with God or whoever I choose to believe in, I cannot keep adding on and pouring out onto other people if I'm not filling myself up. So I have to learn how to say no. And then emotionally, things can be so tiring and draining because you're like, go, 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 go. I'm the Energizer Bunny. But what happens when the Energizer Bunny has no energy, right?
Yes.
So I had to learn if somebody says no to me, why can't I say no to somebody else? Why am I setting unrealistic expectations for myself that I will not want other people to do to me or vice versa? So I have to learn to open my mouth and say no because if I don't say no, I'm going to have regret, I'm going to have
Mhm.
remorse, and there's going to be a whole string of emotions and feelings that are attached to it. So I may be doing something instead of out of peace, love, and joy, I'm doing it out of convenience because I
Mhm.
don't want to disappoint another person. But
Mhm.
newsflash, I'm just going to disappoint myself by
Yeah.
making that other person feel good because I'm now seeking validation from other people who were not meant to validate me on my lifelong journey. So by me just saying this small word, no, and don't explain why I said no, let my
Mhm.
no be no and go on, then I'm
Mhm.
saying yes to myself.
Yeah. And so many people have so much trouble with that. So, like, one of my sayings is, and I help people with clutter, also with mental clutter. And so I always say, like, decluttering is self love. And this is exactly what you're talking about. No, you put yourself and your emotional, mental, physical well being over the other person's, not in a mean way, but just because you can't really live your life by abandoning you and doing what they want to do. But that's what a lot of people do. So would you have? I put you on the spot here. Sorry, but would you have like a nice little tip or maybe a trick or whatever? For somebody who is really scared, like who says I could never say no, what would you tell them how to start? I mean, we all know where they ideally end up, that they actually check in with themselves. Is it really a yes or is it rather a no? But where could they start when they're so terrified?
I would start by asking that individual a question. Why are you afraid to say no? Because we need to go within them to see what paradigms are causing them to feel as if they can't open their mouth to say no. Is it something that they were taught from childhood? Is it something they've learned in adolescence or adulthood? I would also ask them after they answer the question, what is keeping you from saying no? And what emotions rise up when you say no and you feel like saying no. Then I
Mm.
would ask them, is it a want or is it a need? Do you need to say no or do you want to say no? Because
Mm.
that's a difference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the third tip I would ask that individual is when you say no or when you're considering saying no, how do you feel? Do you feel a sense of peace, calmness? Do you feel like the monkey has gotten off your back, metaphorically speaking? Do you feel like the weight has lifted off? Do you feel lighter, freer, and etc. And if you do feel like that whenever you're attempting to say no, but the words just won't come out like a faux pas, and you just can't spit it out, that means that there's still something inside of you that's causing you to have resistant to releasing the no. So we have to see what the resistance in order to release fully the no. So you have to scrub away that in order for you to reprogram. So I say you have to go through deprogramming in order to reprogram.
Yeah. Such great tips. Yes, and I love the thing. Is it a want or is it a need? Very, very smart. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's totally what we need to do. Let's pivot over to, so when did the podcast come in, and what was you as a visionary coach, what was the vision with the podcast? Was it to make you be heard, or was it to promote the book, or was it because Genesis was bored, which I don't believe Genesis could be bored, but who knows?
So the podcast came into fruition whenever my father passed. It was an outlet for me, to be honest, Connie, because I got tired of people saying, "Oh, I know how you feel." And I'm like, "Do you?" Because both of your
Yeah.
parents are still living, so you can't possibly know what it feels like to lose a parent. I got tired of hearing cliche lines, "Oh, we live to die," or "We're all gonna die someday." Because yes, I know they meant well, but those words did not mean well to me in that season when I'm mourning my father. And not only am I mourning him because he was my dad, I'm mourning him from the relationship that I had with my father. Because not everyone has a good relationship with their father, their mother, or who their respective parent is. But whenever you have a tight relationship with that individual and that individual is no longer here, it hurts and cut deeper than if you had a relationship with someone that just passed someone else and they just passed me on. Oh man, I really miss them. But you didn't have that quote unquote tight knit relationship. They were important in your life, but they weren't like, oh my gosh, your right hand person and all of that. So I just started, talking into the mic, and it was my outlet. It was therapy, because not even at the time did my own husband understand what I was going through, because
Yeah.
both of his parents are still living. And he has a different view when it comes to death versus when I come to death. And, we all grieve differently, most importantly. And we were in the middle of a pandemic. So a lot of people were going through loss, whether it was loss of a job, loss of a family member, loss of a friend, loss of a pet, whatever. But I wanted to just go on there and just open and have free conversations, no fluff, no filter, no whatever. And little did I know was me putting down the mic, metaphorically speaking, dropping the mic. Others were picking it up and saying, oh my gosh, this is what I was going through. This is what I was dealing with. And that wasn't even my goal. My goal was just, hey, I'm going to pop into my closet, or I'm going to pop in the shower or whatnot, turn on my phone, hit record, and bam, it's out in the universe. And the podcast transpired from there because people were reaching out to me to be interviewed on the show. I kept saying, no, there's no interviews. I'm just solo dolo. I'm just talking into the mic because I don't have the fancy camera or the fancy microphone or whatnot that I saw other podcasters have. But then I felt something drop down in my spirit when I was ready. I'm going to say I, because I don't like to jump before it's time. So when I was ready, I started to reach back out to those people that were asking to be on the show. I said, hey, the podcast is now going to go through a transition and transformation where it'll be solo as well as guest interviews. I know you reached out back in the clutch in the very beginning. Would you still be interested in being interviewed? And they said yes. So that's when I started, and I got on podmatch.com, where it matches host to guest and vice versa. And I just started to take it off from there. I did not have a fancy mic. I went to Amazon, got this cheap little condenser mic. I actually still have it on my desk in front of me, even though I'm using a new upgraded mic. I could show y'all. There's no string. So look at this. It's very cheap.
Yeah.
This was my first mic, y'all, podcasting. The struggle is real. And then I got a cheap ring light on Amazon I didn't know I
Mhm.
wanted to post the videos, but I knew it was something that I wanted to challenge myself with because I was like, "Oh, my hair's not done right," or "I don't wear makeup. I don't even know how
Mhm.
to put on makeup." And I was like, the aesthetics is just the aesthetics, but people are coming for the content. And if
Yes.
they really like what you're putting down, they're gonna look past how you're dressing. Is your lighting good? Is your background tip top or whatnot? And they're gonna be like,
Mhm.
Genesis and her guest has some amazing things to say with lots of wisdom, lots of gems or whatnot. So then that's kind of how it transitioned and transformed. And I wanted
Mhm.
to be consistent. And every time I hit a milestone, I'm like, I'm doing this for you, Dad. Because if he was
Mhm.
here, he would be my biggest cheerleader.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then, I started sharing it with my mom so her and I could bond, and she started listening on her iPhone, and it was just so cool. It was just so rewarding to just have my mom kinda listen into my content creation and
Yeah.
etcetera, and I was like, "Oh, wow, this is another way that I could connect with my mom," because I was
Mhm.
like, "I don't know how she feels. I've never lost a spouse. My
Mhm.
husband is living, so I can't possibly understand how she's feeling, but I
Mhm.
could resonate and have empathy because she lost her husband, I lost my dad, but the
Yeah.
fact that she did lose her father early on, we do have some streamlines there, but
Mhm.
it's still different, you know? And
Yeah.
we're different age groups, so some of the stuff you wanna talk about with your mother, you're like, "Is it really appropriate to say that?"
Mhm. Yeah.
So I hope
Yeah.
that answers that question, Connie.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love that you found that outlet. So, because I know I lost my dad when I was 20. So I can relate, and I'm not saying I know how you feel, but I can relate to this feeling of not having your best friend or your close connection anymore. And also, the older you get, it's still nice to have your father, and if you don't have him. And so, how do we heal from this? And it will never be the same like before, but we can move on. And this is why I found it was so awesome when you said you found this as an outlet that helped you, because sometimes the society really doesn't know how to deal with people who are grieving, no? And so I wondered, while you were talking like this and then you invited these guests on, did was there anything that stands out that you were learning from one of these guests? Like, you don't have to say names if you don't want to, but just like, oh, this guest said this sentence, and this sentence was like, mind blowing.
So I kept hearing the reoccurring theme of starting ugly because no
Mm-hmm.
matter what guest I interviewed, they all had their start ugly moments before they reached their plateau and their level of success. And that encouraged me because I was in my start ugly moment. Like I was like, I'm not a Joe Rogan and I'm not this
Yeah.
amazing like podcast yet, but I
Mm-hmm.
will get there and have my own
Mm-hmm.
success with it. But if I keep trying to measure myself up with other people's KPIs, then I may be psyching myself out because that means that I'm trying to conform to another standard and level for this particular podcast instead of being me and being unique, being authentic, and just showing up in my own light, my own arena,
Mm-hmm.
and etc. And I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me because it also, coincide with me saying
Mm-hmm.
no to societal norms that
Mm-hmm.
are causing me to retreat, saying no to social media norms that's causing me to second guess me, saying no to the haters, people that cause you to feel less than whenever you're like, does that person even matter a year, 5 years, or 10 years from now? Why the
Mm-hmm.
heck am I allowing this
Yeah.
person to make me feel less than when I know I was created as a masterpiece? I know I was created for a purpose with a mission in mind. Why am I allowing these things to cause me to feel as if I'm invaluable when I am very much valued and I have my own tribe? It may not be your tribe, but that means
Mm.
that I'm not meant to be connected with you.
Yes.
I have my own tribe of people out there.
Yeah. 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 I totally agree. I totally agree. And start scrappy. I had to tell myself that a lot too. I started actually with my iPhone headphones to record. The first few episodes are with that, and you can still get a decent sound there. and nobody has or most people don't have the ears of a sound technician or audio technician who then actually would really hear that, oh my god, she records that with a cheapo microphone. So yes, start scrappy. I love that. Also, maybe start scrappy with saying no. So start saying scrappy no's, that's how we learn. So as I will put for sure all the link, and for sure the link for your podcast in the description of the show notes, because I mean, it's a very, very inspiring. I have so many earmarked that I want to listen to. You have such a diversity of people on the show. That's why I also was asking you whether you learned something special or something mind-blowing from somebody. So what comes next for, yes?
Can I say something
Yeah.
real quick about that? So even though the show is very diverse with a lot of topics, and people are like, you don't have one topic, you need to niche down. The reason why my podcast is so diverse is because not only are my core pillars to educate, inspire, and motivate, but I also like to weave in DEIMB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because it's something that I'm passionate about. And you don't necessarily have to be in a corporate setting to instill those pillars or those methodologies. You can include that in your daily life. And I said, not only is it a part of me, but it's also a part of my heritage, being, first generation American, and also having people of different racial groups married into my family. So that's something that I want to lay a foundation and leave a legacy for my daughter, to say that you could be diverse in any area, you could be inclusive wherever you are, you can have equity, and you can have a sense of belonging, and you don't have to use it as a check the box. So I'm glad that you talked about how broad my show is, because sometimes for some people on the outside looking in, that could be a turn off to them, because they're like, why don't you niche down? And I said, well, if it's working for me, I've made it to the top 2% globally. So obviously there's a tribe of people following me. And me, if I were to niche down, I may get bored easily by talking about the same old topics with different guests, because then you could kind of say, oh, okay, I kind of know where this is going. Not necessarily, because you don't want to make assumptions and make a double S out
Yeah.
of you and the person. But then it's kind of like, oh man, this topic's kind of boring. It's kind of played out. And people may just say, okay, I've heard enough. Let me move on to something else.
Yeah. And I totally agree, because yes, I help people declutter and get organized, but I'm not just talking about that. This is kind of like an after fact. I always say clutter is so much more than we think. And that's why I have a very diverse topics as well. And I think this is what, how you say that? What we have in common, that's the word I was looking for, is that we're a little bit rebellious, no, and we're not doing what everybody else says. And a trailblazer, like you call yourself, can't follow what everybody else says, otherwise you wouldn't be a trailblazer. So kudos to you that you're actually doing what you want to do and are not listening to all these people. So that's awesome. So what comes next? Like the podcast did go through a transition already from solo to with guests. Do you have any exciting that you can talk about? Maybe they're all still top secret, or what comes next for Genesis? Anything exciting coming up that you want to share? If not, I mean, totally fine too. Just thought I ask.
So I did create some merchandise for Jem's podcast. So that's on my website. I don't really promote it much, but it is out there. One of the things that I would like to do, but I'm still trying to launch my creative bubble around it, it's kind of change up the merchandise that I have, whether it's just using quotes on swag like sweatshirts, pants, or whatever's out there, instead of just the cover art of the show. The other thing that I have brewing would be a workbook that will go in addition to the book that I have out. I have the ideas in my head, but it's just getting the ideas out onto paper to make sure that the workbook is really complementary to the book. So as people are reading the book, they're going on their own journey and thinking about what has happened in their career, whether it's working for somebody else or with their business, and how they could create their own metamorphosis.
Yeah, I love the idea of a workbook. That sounds amazing. So before we wrap up, because we want to be mindful of your time, my listeners' time. Before we wrap up, do you have any last words or anything else you want to share? Or maybe I didn't ask something that you were hoping I'm asking. Do you want to say anything? Floor is yours. Say whatever you want to say still.
So I want to tell you, Connie, thank you so much for having me on. And I want to tell the listeners, declutter is real. Whenever you start to declutter your space that you live in, it also helps you declutter your mind. So I go through this period of purging. Like yesterday, randomly, I noticed that one of my shirts had a hole in it. So whenever I took off that shirt, I just threw it in the trash can versus putting it back in the closet because since it has a hole, it's no longer going to serve me. And then just start small with, like, if you want to declutter your pantry, because then you are able to kind of see what you have in there. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this looks so much better. And you're not always going to declutter everything at once, but baby steps. So that's what I wanted to say regarding decluttering, because it's so important to declutter in all areas of your life, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Because whenever you go through that period, you can feel whole and complete, and you could begin operating at a holistic level. And then the quote that I want to leave y'all with is a quote by Babe Ruth that speaks to me. And it says, never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. Because if you allow fear, which is a mindset that conditions you, you'll remain stagnant. But if you overcome the ideology of fear, then you're going to be able to strike out, and you're going to have those home runs. And those home runs, metaphorically speaking, are going to be the big wins in your life. Yes, you're going to have some small wins as well as some big wins, but the most important thing is to celebrate the wins, whether they're small or big. But you're going to get those whenever you rise up, you say no, you declutter areas of your life, you overcome fear, and you start walking into endless possibilities. You start seeing yourself as a masterpiece. You check in with yourself. You practice self-care and self-love, and you realize how important and valuable that you are. And once you realize that, then you're going to be able to really link arms with other people in a synergies way, because you're not going to allow competition to distract you. You're going to be able to allow the synergies to complement how you show up for yourself and other people that rely on you.
Beautifully said, Genesis. Thank you so much for all your wisdom you shared. And these last words were very beautiful. Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time and coming on to my show. Thank you.